Hello. In a previous episode, I talked about how the defensive strategy that exists as part of practically every nation's policy of international relations, which leads to military buildup and promotes military alliances and nuclear proliferation, in fact can beget and lead to the kinds of attacks such strategies are meant to prevent. And the answer or conclusion might well be, in that regard, well, stop building defenses and stop promoting defensiveness if we want to create peace. But, and it's a big but, this is easier said than done. And to understand this, we only need to look to ourselves and our relationships. Perhaps you can recognize it. A conversation between close friends or partners where a choice or decision by the one has been questioned by the other, and the response is one of calm, reasoned explanation. The choice or decision couldn't have been any other way, and there is a need for the other person to see and understand it as so. But they don't see it like that. There is a kind of standoff, a gulf, and a hidden defensiveness. I cannot be wrong. You simply don't understand what you're talking about. The defense is against the alternative view, the possibility that it might be right, or at least hold some truth, and yet it feels totally justified to uphold it. Here's a tiny example of what I think and what I see plays out on the grandest, largest scales. And here we're entering into the heart of one of the most subtle and persistent dynamics in the human experience, the challenge of defenselessness. And not just the personal kind, but the societal, the cultural, the deeply embedded kind that lives in all of us and between all of us. Today, I want to speak not only from an analytical or observational lens, but also from personal experience and lived transformation. So, welcome to today's episode of The Higher Self Dialogues with me, your host, Anton Jarrett. If we pursue the spiritual path, we learn early on that it's about love and openness. In the Christian tradition, we inherit teachings that are just part and parcel of world spirituality now, such as turn the other cheek and love thine enemy. These are teachings against defensiveness, and the path of awakening is seen as one of dropping the masks, the shields, the roles, the guards of defensiveness. But even after years of inner work, even decades, defensiveness still creeps in and takes on the appearance of a helpful, protective friend. It lurks behind clever arguments and sophisticated rationalizations. It masquerades as strength. It cloaks itself in spiritual language and even spiritual boundaries. In the calls for personal integrity, defensiveness can be alive and kicking. And as an aside, there is an opportunity there for spiritual language, by the way, to be more aligned, to help reveal hidden defensiveness, and to help people see the dangers of defensiveness in the paths being described. This doesn't occur because defensiveness is a sly old devil. I mean, it is that, but the main reason, as I see it, is that defensiveness is just part of the structure of reality. And in particular, the reality of being a self in relation to an other, as other person, world, universe, in the face of transformation. The evolutionary and transformational dynamic is experienced at first as a loss, as threat to self, and so the self defends against it. And this plays out in all sorts of ways in our individual and collective self as a planet, and it's natural. In our most intimate relationships, defensiveness often takes the wheel before we even realize there's a journey happening. A raised eyebrow, a misplaced word, an eye roll, a sudden shift in tone, and then the mind scrambles. What are they implying? Are they criticizing me, threatening my independence, questioning, dismissing my truth? We think, I've already spelled out what the situation is and illustrated how it is so. Why are they saying they thought it was different? And so on. And this plays out time and time again. The body tightens, the mind hardens, the heart retreats. We don't even see it. And it feels like self-respect when we take the defensive position. It feels like clarity, like clarification and truth-telling. But very often, it's fear also. It's the sense that something essential to who we are is under threat. And if we don't respond, often forcefully, even if passively, we'll be erased in some way. When we look closer, we often see that this fear isn't even about the present moment. It's often about echoes from the past, childhood wounds, family, former betrayals, a learned hypervigilance that tells us that we must always be ready to fight or flee or shut down, and it tells us that surrender is death, that yielding is shame. It's all classic psychology, right? Even in the most minor or mundane of situations, it's not a minor reaction, and it's actually something primal and deep. Always, I think. And it's everywhere, and it affects everyone, whether you're spiritually attuned or not. In fact, some forms of advanced spirituality, especially along what's been called the negative polarity, can amplify this, and it can become such an advanced form of the good of love that it would be unrecognizable as an evil, but instead identifiable as the unpleasant good. For most, however, defensiveness simply becomes a form of subtle, weaponized language and high-minded ideals around truth-telling and authenticity. I'm maintaining my boundaries. I'm protecting my energy. I'm refusing to engage in toxic dynamics. Now, sometimes this is true and necessary. And I'm not saying that all defensiveness has to be dropped. If someone is coming at you with a hammer or an axe, then it's important to defend yourself, unless it really is your path to sacrifice your life. But often it isn't in the face of genuine danger. It's important to distinguish between non-defensive and defensive formations, as well as genuinely required defensiveness and defensiveness which is totally unnecessary and harmful to yourself and others, as they can all look like the same thing. But sometimes defensiveness is just fear in a different outfit. And when we can name this clearly, we can begin to reclaim our power without having to rely on a denial of fear, but through an alignment with deeper truth and reality. In my own journey, one of the most recent transformative periods of my life was in a relationship that tested every boundary I had in a most confronting way. It was a relationship in which my ideas about myself, what I was doing with my life, where I needed or wanted to live, and many other things were challenged, and in which the way I handled that challenge was also challenged, leading to a lot of conflict and pain between us. The situation and the relationship as a whole was in fact a mirror, and in both of us were revealed many things that we wouldn't have been able to see and did not in fact see before. And that touches on the unpleasant good that can come out of hard reality. But most of all, as relevant for today's episode at least, I saw how the unnecessary or fear-based defensiveness created a situation of conflict in which there was then genuine attack and harmful behaviors happening, which called for genuine putting up of defenses. And this was a kind of, a strange situation which I wasn't able to see at the time. False and unwanted defensiveness had led to and created the grounds for genuine conflict, leading to the need for actual defensiveness. And to make matters worse, whilst one had caused the other, so it seemed to me, they were now both playing out side by side, making it impossible to tell what was going on or stop being defensive, and making it impossible to let the guard down. Now, I'm still trying to understand this. I don't want to give the impression that I've totally understood what happened in my particular relationship, as I think it will actually take a long time to truly understand that. And in many ways, certain dynamics are still playing out. It doesn't belong to the past. It's still present. But I understand something about it. And it's on this basis that I can see how relationships and experiences like mine can be a microcosm for what is happening at large. And the pattern is this: a history of fear and suspicion and mistrust leads to the creation of defenses such that actions by either side are construed as forms of attack, which leads to more defensiveness. And eventually, this creates a toxic or intolerable environment in which there is then a genuine conflict, which calls for defensiveness and provides a kind of macabre justification for the original defensive posture in the first place. In the episode before last, I spoke about how the world's defensive strategy was in fact only a factor in the creation of the very situation that it was trying to protect against. I was not surprised to see in the press after that episode some articles affirming that position, because many people in fact see the picture for how it is and look at the growing escalation of crises and conflict as an effect, a symptom of this very dynamic. The lesson is avoid unnecessary defensiveness. But as my own story tells me, sometimes that's practically impossible, even if you see it and even if you dearly wish that it wasn't so. So what does this mean? Does this mean that conflict is inevitable? Well, I still don't think so. I think what the observation and identification of defensive behavior does is it allows for the possibility of stopping it or dialing it back. And it's only because of that possibility that the inevitability of conflict can be in question. Because until you observe the pattern or chain of possible causes and effects, and until you acknowledge it, you have no chance to do anything about it. Because once the false, posturing, fear-based and irrational defensiveness has tipped over into conflict, well, then it's a different story, isn't it? It then becomes a story of ending conflict, not avoiding it in the first place. And that's a totally different dynamic. But even then, awareness of defensiveness and its role in things is key to peace. Unfortunately, though, what I would say is that because of this dynamic of defensiveness and the challenge of defenselessness, conflict, whilst not always inevitable, is in this particular scenario and the way things play out much more likely until the underlying dynamic is observed and called out, which gives the parties involved in the conflict the opportunity to de-escalate. And we do see that happening at times, don't we, in conflicts, that, you know, one country fires a missile, the other country fires a missile back, and then it's like, oh, hold on, yeah, what are we doing? We don't want this to, we can see where this is going. Let's pull back on the defensiveness. Let's pull back on the attack as a form of defense. The only problem is that it's part of a wider picture and pattern of defensiveness. And often the underlying dynamic is not observed fully or acknowledged or taken responsibility for. The topic around defensiveness and defenselessness is extraordinarily large, I think, and can't be done justice in a single episode, but I'm sure that I'll talk about it again in many different ways in the future, because I'm learning about it and I'm struggling with it myself. I'm on a journey with it too, and perhaps you are. Well, I think the whole world is on a journey with this. The world most definitely is, at the moment, what we're seeing around us in the macro scale is a real struggle with defenselessness, as seen by the absolutely non-negotiable position that the world takes towards defensiveness. And yet, within that rigidity lies an opportunity, a deeper invitation to presence, to transparency, to a kind of power that doesn't require a gun or a bomb. And this is the space, I believe, that we are being called collectively towards, however tentatively, however slowly. And so I might leave you with this question. What if our greatest conflicts, those both personal and global, are mirrors inviting us into deep self-honesty and not further defense? What if it's picking up those mirrors rather than the guns and the bombs is where the evolution truly begins? Well, that's all from me. Thank you for listening to the Higher Self Dialogues. I'll see you in the next episode, but for now, goodbye.